This is Duke University.
Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Janine Reed. I'm an Associate Professor of Sociology and Global Health and the Associate Director for Social Initiatives at the Duke Islamic Studies Center, which is hosting the event today along with several Duke co-sponsors. So it is my great pleasure to introduce you John Zogby. When I called him up way before the election and asked him to kindly speak as our final speaker in the Citizenship, Democracy lecture series for the Duke Islamic Studies Center, he said yes. And here he is, and I thought it's a week after the elections, and I'm pretty sure he has not slept since the elections. So he may want to rethink saying yes to the week after. There are a million things I can say about John, but let me try to summarize, in a sentence, that he is by far one of the most admired and respected political pollsters and analysts in the United States today. His accolades go on, and I actually had to write some down because I knew I was not going to remember all of them. So, founder of the Zogby Polls, senior advisor at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, regular contributor to Forbes and the Huffington Post, and I had the pleasure of receiving your weekly Obama grades that was posted on the U.S. News and World Report, Washington Whisperer, and author of the New York Times best-selling book, The Way Will Be, the Zogby Report on the Transformation of the American Dream. And that's what's on the internet, and you can find that. But let me just tell you two things that I admire most about John, having known him as a mentor and someone I've respected for many years, is that he is committed to science. As a pollster, he uses numbers, and he doesn't go beyond the numbers. And sometimes that is a good thing, and sometimes he's not out in the media as much as other people are, but at the same time, that's why he doesn't only do political polling, but polling for marketing firms and for agencies around the world, not just in the United States. The second is his commitment to education and his ability to communicate and entertain audiences. And I've witnessed that firsthand. And I'm going to stop now so that he can prove it to you himself. And without further ado, I would like to welcome John Zogby.
Janine was a graduate student. We did surveys together on women in Islam. When you wrote to me this post-election, I knew it was going to be very, very busy. It always is after the election. But I didn't know that I'd be so busy answering thousands of emails from somebody named Jill Kelly. Does anybody know her? Wow, that's a whole other story, isn't it? We're not going to talk about that one. I'm going to get right into it, because there is a lot to talk about, and then I want to hear from you. And I want to hear from you about polling as well, any questions that you might have about what it is we do and how we do it. And as Janine points out, I stick to the numbers, but I find the story. And that's what's so very important is finding what all those numbers ultimately mean and being able to point to directions. So, on the basis of having followed this election, as I normally do, hour by hour, and then doing an extensive post-election survey and then going through with loose leaf notes, mind you, the exit polls nationwide and in key states, let me just say as a premise that what we had last Tuesday was a huge demographic victory, not quite an ideological victory. And that's what made the election very interesting and what will make the next 4 weeks, let alone the next 4 years, very interesting. So what do I mean by a huge demographic victory. Senator Obama, 4 years ago, put together an historic coalition of key demographic groups. And I say historic coalition because it fit in the same category with Franklin Roosevelt in 1932, the New Deal coalition. Major shift of some key demographics in 1932. So we had, in the New Deal coalition, you had the liberal and left establishment and intellectuals and urban dwellers. You had white ethnic groups and unionists. You had southern white farmers. For the first time, a tilt of African Americans slowly but steadily away from the party of Lincoln to the party of Roosevelt. And you had white racists as well. The New Deal coalition. And for the most part, this New Deal coalition stayed intact through the 1970s until the next great demographic coalition, and that was 1980 with Ronald Reagan. And by that time, you had a combination of things taking place. The sons and daughters, maybe grandsons and granddaughters of New Dealers, less dependent on federal largesse, more concerned about government spending, which had reached a crescendo during Vietnam and Great Society under Lyndon Johnson. At the same time, tilting a bit more conservative on some social issues. And the phenomenon of Reagan Democrats became the talking point and the dominant force that tilted the country away from the New Deal coalition to the Reagan coalition. Each of these coalitions lasted 2 generations. And now in 2008, we have a new demographic coalition which will last at least 2 generations. Now, when I talk about that, elections still have to be won one at a time. Let's make no mistake about that. There are always dominant issues. There are always times when voters may pull back. There are times when some may be more enthusiastic about a candidate or a personality than at other times. But by and large, let's look at the key elements of this coalition. There were 4 groups that put Senator Obama over the top and then made us wonder in 2012 whether or not that coalition would stay intact. So the first group are Latinos. And this is something that cannot be underestimated. Because if you just look at the electorate alone, Latinos were 4% of 92 million voters in 1992. They were 5% of 95 million voters in 96. 6% of 105 million voters in 2000. 8% of 122 million voters in 04. 9% of 133 million voters in 2008. Would they turn out this year? There was never a doubt in my mind that they would. And they did. 10%, we're still counting. 10% of 130 million voters this time around. Last time, Barack Obama received 67% of the Latino vote to John McCain's 31%. A year ago, Latinos, like many other elements of the Obama coalition, were disappointed in the president. Unemployment. Would they be less disappointed? Would they come out to vote? One of the fascinating things to watch during this election cycle was how the disappointment dissipated. Starting with the economy, but also on the flip side, the Republican primaries, in which the Republican candidates all, and most especially Governor Romney, tilted so far in an anti-illegal immigration stance. And I can tell you, having done focus groups among Latinos and surveys going back to the 1990s, having experienced Prop 187 in California, another time when Latinos soundly rejected the GOP, not only in California, but nationwide, we never saw Governor Romney get more than 26 or 27% of the Latino vote, and that's deadly. That makes a winning campaign nearly impossible. Not impossible, but nearly impossible, especially if the Latino vote's going up and you're getting a smaller piece of the pie. And so this time around, with the daily tracking, we saw Obama and his numbers among Latinos jumping to the point where on election day, depending on which exit or post-election poll you look at, 71 to 74% of Latinos, almost 13 million voters, voted for the president. Number two, African Americans. Now, African Americans are not a growing part of the population, but they're a growing part of the electorate. That's important. In a typical presidential election, African Americans are about 10% of those who turn out to vote. They were 12.9% in 2012. Now, the same issue this time, would they turn out to vote? Because when unemployment was up, we did see some disappointment among African Americans in the president. But what became very clear to me from the polling were two things. One was African Americans were going to vote. Now, you know how I tell that? Very, very simple. When I look at the subgroup of African Americans, who are you going to vote for if the election were held today, and I see almost none undecided, that means they're going to vote. When I see 10% undecided, that doesn't mean they're ever going to vote for the Republican nominee. It just simply means they're not going to vote. So when I would see the numbers coming in 97 to 1, 95 to 2, 93 to 4, very few undecided, sometimes none undecided. Yes, they were going to vote. And the only issue then was Obama going to match the 95% of African Americans that he got last time? See, normally a Democrat gets 90% of 10% of the electorate. But this time around, the African American portion of the electorate jumped from 12.9 to 13.1. And Obama got 93% of the African American vote. Score 2 for the president. And keep adding in your mind. Oh, no, I don't want to sound like the Rain Man here, but just keep adding in your mind. 10% Latino, 13% African American. I'm going to get back to that one, okay? The third group, young people. 18 to 29 is the way we usually measure that. That's what's on all the other polls. We do that as well. I go a little bit further because I'm focusing on the group born between 1979 and 1994. That is a group that I call the first globals, America's first global citizens. Now, let me tell you a little bit about you. 66% of your entire age cohort have passports and have traveled abroad. You have a planetary sensibility that no other age cohort has, in the sense that not only have you traveled abroad, but you follow global sports, global music, global fashion. In addition to that, 27% of you expect, not hope or wish, 27% of you expect to live and work in a foreign capital at some point in your lives. In addition to that, you are the most multicultural and most multinational of any age cohort that's reached adulthood to date. So let me get personal here. I'm 64, and I know I don't look it. But 81% of us guys are white. My sons are in their early 30s, and 61% of their age cohort are white. And hallelujah, my grandchild is going to be born in March, where his or her age cohort will be 49% white. There's enough documentation right there. So, multicultural, you were the only age cohort who, when asked, is American culture inherently superior to the cultures of filling in the blanks for each one, you're the only ones that have a substantial majority. You're the only ones who have a majority, but the only ones with a substantial majority that say, no, it is not. This is a completely different world. Be prepared. Your kids are going to be going to Neptune for the weekend. You're going to be pulling your hair out. But you are so different from the rest of us. So now, you guys voted for Barack Obama in huge numbers, 66% to 30% in 2008. Why? Well, it was historic, but in one of the many polls of young people that I've done for Hamilton College over the years, did this one in December, right at the end of the semester, December 2004, we asked, what will America look like 20 years from now? And the #1 open response was Barack Obama. Now, that's 3-4 months after his speech. Why? #1 answer, because he looks like us. So there was a sense that, not that, remember there was a debate back then, is Barack Obama a baby boomer or is he a Generation Xer? Neither. Young people felt he was a fellow global citizen. And so there was something historic about Barack Obama and something that fit into this age cohort perfectly. But the polling this year was a big question mark among young people. A year ago, Obama was polling 48-49% among 18 to 29-year-olds. And there was a substantial number of undecideds, and that's what we didn't know. Those kids are going to vote. They're going to vote Republican. They're going to vote third party. Ron Paul, you put Ron Paul into the mix. Ron Paul was getting 10-12% at one point of young voters. There was something going on with young voters that made this all a question mark. And it was this small but steadily growing phenomenon that I was calling Senga. C-E-N-G-A. College educated, not going anywhere. It was rough. We were feeling it, we were hearing it. When we talked in great detail, it's one thing to have a 4-year recession. It's another thing when a 4-year recession is your entire adult life. And there's no prospect. And on top of that, there's personal debt. and this huge, unfathomable figure of government debt. And you don't have a sense of when you're going to get started. And so this was one group that was a huge question mark for us. As it turned out, Obama did get 61% of young people. He slipped. And interestingly, Romney overperformed McCain. So Romney got about 35% of young people. But the important thing was that the young people portion that Obama got did not hurt so much, considering the other two groups that I've just mentioned. So we get into the fourth.
So John, really quickly, for those of us who are trying to add, what percentage is that group of the electorate?
Oh,
Gave
all
us
right.
10,
I'm
13.
sorry. No, 19%, which is another important factor, and I'm sorry. And this is one of the problems when you don't use notes. They were 19% of the total in 2008, and there was a question mark as to whether there would be slippage this time. They were, in fact, according to the exit polls, 19% of the turnout. Now, you've got overlap here, obviously.
Yeah.
But when all of a sudden, I think you're seeing how a majority coalition develops. Let's get to the fourth group, and that is what my good friend Richard Florida calls the creative class. How many have heard that term? Richard Florida, the creative class. The book you ought to check out. That one you should read. I want you to buy my book. I don't care if you read it. Richard Florida's I want you to read. 35 million American voters in 2008 self-described as the creative class. Who are they? They're people who work in the knowledge sector. Now, that's a broad array of people from the traditional professions, doctor, lawyer, professor, or architect, to technology, engineers and designers, graphic designers, arts, entertainment, media, healthcare, education, and so on. Barack Obama got 60% of the creative class last time. That was going to be a question mark this time. And it was more than the fact that he got 60% of 35 million creative class voters. Because Richard Florida talks about the clustering of the creative class. And if you look at the major clusters of the creative class, I'm going to paint you a picture that made this so vital. Boston, which includes southern New Hampshire, northern Virginia, right here, Research Triangle, Charlotte, North Carolina, southern Florida, Cleveland, Akron, Ohio, Des Moines, Ames, Iowa. What am I getting at here? Anybody know? College, but also all of these swing states, which had been red states, which had voted for George W. Bush. It was the creative class in tandem with the other groups that put these into the blue column. Now, and in 2008, now the question mark was, were they going to stay blue? And you know, every one of them was close this time. So ultimately, Obama is polling 49-51% of the creative class. He's underperforming where he was in 2008. At the end, this is what we saw shifting, particularly in Virginia. We saw it shifting in North Carolina. Remember, North Carolina was pretty close. It was very, very close. When all is said and done, Obama won every one of those states with the exception of North Carolina. And overall, ended up with 56% of the creative class. This is the essence of that coalition. Now, let me carry it forward, because I'm here talking to the Islamic Studies Center. Now, Muslims are a small portion of the vote. In 2000, Muslims tilted slightly towards George W. Bush. Conservative values, although a lot are in urban areas, and of course 20 to 22% are African Americans who vote as African Americans. But really importantly, what happened was after 9/11, and what happened was the war in Iraq and the Patriot Act. And what happened was that by the time we polled the 2004 election, and remember, we're talking about a small group here, but our polls showed American Muslims supporting John Kerry 77-7. Now, there was a poll that was done, and a pre-election and then an exit poll by CARE. I would be very cautious, because they don't describe their methodology. I'd be very cautious about a poll from CARE. But when it said that 85% of the 650 voters that they polled on election day voted for Barack Obama, I really wouldn't doubt it. Whatever it is, let's just say a lot of Muslims voted for Barack Obama. Why? Because he is a Muslim. No. Boy, what we endure. Let's look at the demographics of Mitt Romney for a moment. Romney had to do two things in order to win. One was he had to win substantially among white voters. And then secondly, in particular, evangelical voters. This was a huge question mark, because among white voters, back in 2008, whites were 74% of the total vote. And John McCain got 57% of that pie. We never saw Romney until the very end even matching that 57%. It was always 54, 55%, but that was only a part of it. The other part of it was, I was projecting that the total white vote would be 71% of the total. It came out to 72% of the total. Shoot me for a point. But it declined. Romney got 61% of the white vote. That was not enough. He needed 66% of the white vote. He didn't get it. So when I'm asked the question, how can a guy count on winning the presidency with only 38, 39% of the white vote? What I've just described for you is how that can happen, because that's a smaller piece of the pie. It's going to continue to be a smaller piece of the pie. But let's look at evangelicals for a moment, because this is a fascinating dynamic. Evangelical voters in 2008 split 70-30. 70 McCain, he was not their favorite candidate. 30% for Obama. That's about right, because about 29-30% of evangelicals tend towards liberal and Democrat. However, there is a dynamic taking place here. In the polling, right to the very end, we saw 10% of evangelicals saying they were undecided who they were going to vote for. Now, 10% undecided is huge, because that's all being taken off around them. And when we asked months ago, why are you undecided? 1/3 of those undecided evangelicals said we will never vote for a Mormon. So now you're looking at a close race here, right? You're looking at a close race here, and this is one group. Now, that's one end of the spectrum. Let's go all the way over to the other end of the spectrum, and let's look at your cohort. Younger evangelicals under the age of 35 are not your father's evangelicals. They're different. Now, they're conservative, they're pro-life, they're pro-guns, for the most part against gay marriage. The difference is the intensity factor. They don't want to talk about that stuff anymore. That's what's really interesting. They tell their pastors, as they tell us pollsters, we want to talk about global poverty. We want to talk about poverty in our community. We want to talk about man's stewardship of God's earth, the environment. We want to talk about human rights of Christians, but human rights. Very different focus. And this is how you get, just it being emblematic here, this is how you get from a movement dominated by a James Dobson to a movement dominated by a Rick Warren. It's, sorry for the pun, but it is fundamentally different. Ouch. I didn't say that. But it is. It is. And so, to a great degree, demographics is destiny. I'm not going to suggest, as two prominent authors, Reed Teixeira and John Judas, suggest, the emerging Democratic majority. I don't go that far. Because I don't think still that there was an ideological tipping point last week. But there is an emerging GOP oblivion. The demographics are working against the Republican Party. Do they have openings? Yes. Entrepreneurship is a good one. One thing about your age cohort that you need to understand is that you are entering a world where it is moot to be talking about a jobs economy. You are entering a world dominated by what we call the gig economy. You will have 4 gigs by the age of 30 and 10 by the age of 40. So in other words, you have to be entrepreneurial. You have to be nimble, to be flexible. And you don't need tax cuts in order to do that. You need other measures that enable you. You need networks. A lot of that you're going to do on your own, but you need government to not be in your way, essentially. There are Latino entrepreneurs and Asian American entrepreneurs. 66% of Asians, incidentally, voted Democrat. My point is, we're facing a fiscal cliff. There will probably be a deal. That's the first time I've gotten to probably. There will be a deal. Why? Because there has to be a deal. Both parties will be in serious trouble if there isn't, but particularly the Republicans, because they lost the election and they have no ground to stand on in terms of obstructing any deal. But in the final analysis, as we kind of forge ahead, look for a serious internal debate within the GOP. And I, for one, suggest that it's not going to be pretty, and I don't know how it reconciles itself. The Republicans need a moderate wing, and they have been firing, discouraging the moderate wing. They need minority support, but that requires some flexibility on some positions. There's an anti-statist group, libertarians, I think especially among young people, this growing group of libertarians that don't trust Democrats or Republicans, presidents or Congresses, Boy Scouts or bishops, don't trust anyone. And I don't know where young libertarians are going to park. I don't know which side they're going to be on, but I do know that there are two faces of libertarianism, and one is very deeply concerned about fiscal issues for good reason. But the other face of libertarianism is very deeply concerned about invasiveness in private lives. So, predicting the future? I don't. I just suggest. There will be a serious Republican debate. It will not be pretty, and it could be the dissolution of the GOP as we know it. And otherwise, I have nothing to say. Thank you very much. Is that it?
Produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.